Hello everyone, here we are in Module 2, and I had indicated in the intro that we would talk about the discovery phase in more detail. This is the discovery phase of the data analytics lifecycle. So that's what this quick presentation will be about. So, overview of discovery. What are we doing when we're doing this first phase? Well, this is just at the very beginning. The stakeholders come to us and says, I think I have a problem with data, or I have a problem that is presenting itself in such and such way. Is there any data that will tell me what's really going on here? So that's where we're going to start our process. That's the discovery process. So as a data science, say a data scientist or a member of a data science team, I'm going to start talking to the stakeholder and trying to learn what's really going on. So the very beginning is we learn and we investigate the problem. And there's oftentimes going to be a difference between how the problem is presenting itself and what's really going on. In an earlier video, I had made mention of the fact that there's an example. Example could be that there's a call center where the agents aren't able to keep up with the demand, and consequently they're generating really long queues. So that's how the problem is presenting itself. But the data problem, or the real problem, kind of the root cause problem, might be something completely different. It could be, as I'd indicated in the earlier video, the fact that there's too much volatility, too much variability in the number of calls coming in. So it makes it very difficult to predict what's going on, or very difficult to predict how to staff that. There could also be some other issues. But oftentimes the data analysis will get us to that root cause. But what you're going to hear from your stakeholders, you're going to hear that this is what the problem looks like to me. When I come to work every day, this is what I'm seeing. So that's why discovery is so important, because we really need to discover what the stakeholder is seeing and what might be behind it. So again, we begin by learning and investigating the problem. We'll develop context and understanding, and this is just, again, trying to get down to the root cause, what's really going on here. Then we'll start to learn about the data sources that are going to be needed or that might be available for the project. So for our example of the call center, what are they tracking? They must be tracking when calls come in. So there's going to be data that comes off of the phone system. There's also going to be data that comes in regarding staffing, so staffing levels. So we might want to go back 2, 3, 4 months and what data are available for us? What are we going to be able to get? So that's going to be important for us to track, because that will structure the entire problem. If we have a data need, something that we would like to see, for example, the number of hours each agent has worked, and the problem is that we don't track that, then that's going to be a real limiting factor on what we're able to put together. So, and then also in the discovery phase, we might formulate some initial hypotheses that can be later tested with the data. So one of the hypotheses is the one I just threw out, is that there's too much volatility or too much variability in the number of calls that are coming in on an hourly basis. So if that's a hypothesis, I can either prove or disprove that hypothesis when I do the data analysis. So learning the business domain, let's go into a little bit of detail each of those steps. Being data aware is only half the battle, and a good data analyst or a good data scientist is going to take the time to learn what's really going on in the business. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be a business expert. It just means you have to have a full contextual understanding of where the problem is originating. So it's important to have some amount of knowledge about the business domain and where the data problem originated, just like I just said. The question is, how much knowledge? So good practice is to work with business stakeholders, get a full understanding of the context of the problem, and identify who cares about the problem, right? Is this just a small issue and it's only going to be the stakeholder that cares, or is this really, really impactful to the organization? Same thing, who benefits from this solution? If we solve this problem, what is the scope of the benefit that could come? Would it come just to a few, or does it come, as an overall kind of financial benefit to the organization? And this one's kind of important as well, is that no business problem originates in a vacuum. They're usually tied to others, business processes or business problems, and they're almost always going to impact other people. So it's going to be important for you to get an idea of what's feeding into this and what's associated with this. Even if you just think of the example I threw out about the agents in the call center, there's issues of staffing, there's issues of scheduling, there's issues of even attracting employees to the call center. These are all things that need to be considered and need to be taken into account. And when you solve one problem, you want to make sure you don't create another one. So the other thing we want to think about in the discovery phase is, what are we going to have available to us to solve this problem? So what is available to the data science team? What technology? Are we going to have an entire server or an entire space in a cloud or something like that that we can use to actually build a sandbox? What data is going to be available? So what systems? There are many inputs that are causing this problem, but how many of those do we actually track in a database or track in a system? So what data is available? Who might be available to help us? Because we might be able to come up with an idea of what we want to do, but we would really like to work with this person in IT who's a great R programmer or a great Python coder. Is that person going to be available to us? On the business side, who are the business people that we're going to want to talk to, and are they going to be available to us? Really important to understand also, how long do we have to work on this project? This is a project that could take 1 week or it could take 1 year, depending on the scope of the project. So how much time do we have? And once we understand what's available to us, what resources are available to us, we have to make sort of a judgment call. And this is where it's kind of we don't want to set ourselves up for failure. But if we know that we need certain resources, we're going to need a server, we're going to need access to other resources, we're going to need the data, and those things are not being made available to us, we need to raise a red flag, because that means that the data project is likely to fail, or we're not going to get anywhere with it, or they're going to try to make us do with what we have. And we just need to be clear that if those situations arise, that there are going to be limits to what we're going to be able to get done. So really the question at the very end is, are there sufficient resources available to be successful on this project? And we'll have to make that judgment call. Next, we're going to frame the problem. And we're going to frame the problem as a data analytics problem. Okay, so we'll state the analytics problem to be solved. We can do it as a team and collaboratively get an understanding of the problem or the needs. So when we do that, we're trying to keep in mind, what are the objectives in terms of business needs? What are we trying to get out of this? We also want to have a clear understanding of what is success going to look like and what is failure going to look like. So if we're framing this as an analytics problem, and maybe this is, an attempt to solve the variability of the number of calls that are coming in every hour and being able to do a better forecast, what will it look like if we're successful? And that should be metric driven. So, it could be that we knock down the queue times by X percentage, and that would be our success metric. Or it could be that, some other metric like that. And it's important to have that, because you need to know when the project is done, when we've achieved our success. So what success looks like is clear. What does failure look like? That can be useful as well. We want to know, if we're not able to solve this problem, at what point do we say, we just didn't have what we needed to solve this problem. We don't have the data, or we're going to have to go back and start changing the way we track things. Whatever, just, be certainly clear on what success looks like, but also have an idea of what it looks like if we're not able to get this done. Important to know who our key stakeholders are. Chances are the key stakeholder is the person who's brought you the data problem, but there may be others. That person may be a spokesperson for others who are very interested in solving the problem or pursuing an opportunity. So know your stakeholders, your key stakeholders, and know their priorities. It may be that these are financially driven, or it may be that they're service driven, or it may be something else that is a huge priority. So if you're dealing with like the CFO of the organization, that's probably going to be financially driven. If you're dealing with a product manager or marketing manager, then that might be more service driven. So if they have goals and priorities, it'll be important for you to know what those are. You also have regular stakeholders. Key stakeholders are your drivers, and those are the ones who are going to be kind of in charge of working with you hand in hand, side by side, trying to solve this problem or pursue an opportunity. But there are other people who are going to be touched by your work, people who will be impacted by your work. They may not be driving it, but they're going to be touched by it. So it's important to know what the impact of the project is going to be on them. You're going to want to carefully interview your key stakeholder. Again, this is the discovery phase, so we want to discover the best information we can about this. Not only what the problem is, but what sources of data do we have? What information do they have at their fingertips, or what might we be able to get? And then what are their priorities? What are they looking for? And what will success look like to them? We will also develop initial hypotheses. And these are, I've talked about these already, but they're statements of what we think is going on and what we think we can solve. So we believe the data will show us, or we can build a model that will do, or the data that we have access to suggests. What are our initial hypotheses? So again, I threw that one out, that I believe the data will show us that the variability in the number of calls is very high, and that is making it incredibly difficult to forecast staffing levels to ensure that we keep our queues at a very low level, that the wait times are very low. So that could be my hypothesis. It could be proven to be true. It could be proven to be wrong. But it could be a kind of a statement around which we start constructing a model or start planning a model and then eventually even building a model. So these hypotheses can help guide the direction of the project and make sure your stakeholder agrees to them, because they're not going to do you much good if they don't. We'll identify potential data sources. Okay. Talked about this a little bit already, but identify the kinds of data that the team will need, first of all, to address the hypotheses, and then make sure that the team has access to that data. It's also important that the team have access to data at multiple levels. So often it's easy to get data that has already been processed, and I call it aggregated data. But you might get, for example, in our phone queue example, you might get reports that show on a day-by-day basis the number of calls that came in each hour. But you don't actually get a listing of each individual call and the duration of that call and what time it was received. These all could be really useful pieces of information in planning out a data project, a data model, and even actually implementing a data model. So in some cases, you're only going to have access to aggregated data, and that will be a limitation on your project. But in some cases, if you dig a little bit, you can get access to the raw data that actually was used to build that aggregation, and that will be a preference to, you'll want to get that access to that data if you can. Then you'll also want to see about just how much data are we looking at. So volume, variety, and velocity, those are the three V's of data or big data, and how much of it, how much data do we have, how much are we going to use or need, and how fastly is it changing, or how fastly is it coming out, how quickly is it coming in. And then, is your tool static or real time? Are you going to be building a model that reports out on a real-time basis what the queues are, what the wait times are in the queue? There are already IVRs that do that. Or is your model going to be run every Friday and it's going to give you information on a weekly basis? Or it's just, what kind of model really are you building? And that's a wrap of discovery. Next module will be on to data preparation. But there's a lot, it seems like there's a lot to the discovery phase. And that's because there is. You're really trying to make sure that ultimately what you're trying to do is you're trying to get in there and fully understand the business context in which the data problem or data opportunity has arisen, and what are all the factors that impact that. And those factors are, not only the context of the business problem, but also where are we getting the data, who's going to help us, who's going to be on the business side, and ultimately we're trying to set ourselves up to successfully address this issue in a very productive way. And so we want to make sure that we cross all of our T's, dot all of our I's. And if any of you are familiar with project management, this is very similar to what we would do in the initial stages of working with stakeholders on a project in a project management environment. Next week, we'll talk about data prep. And if you have any questions, let me know.